do a deep dive into those lyrics and look at the music itself, and then maybe do a little research on the artist and the band. It just makes the task so much more enjoyable for them. It really pushes them to be more thoughtful and critically minded.
Welcome to Can I Get a Retake, where education meets innovation.
Well, welcome. Johnny Hrebik, Department Chair of English at Cape Fear Community College in Wilmington, North Carolina. You're also the author of the GRL title, Memories and Melodies, the Essential First Year Writing LP. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just go right back to the beginning. I'm curious as to how you ended up in higher education. So could you just share a little bit about what that journey was like, and specifically what drew you to English and composition?
Yeah, that's a long story. I will try to give you the truncated, abridged version, but honestly, I never imagined I would be in academia. When I was in high school and finishing high school, I was in a band, the drummer. It was, grunge was at its height, and I was all set. I was going to play in my band, and my mother and father really encouraged me, like, look, Johnny, you may need a backup plan. You should really think about going to college. And so I did, but I never thought that I would end up being an English professor or teaching writing. I really went into college with little guidance. I'm a first generation college student, and I really didn't know what to expect. And so even when I graduated, I was still left with wondering, what was I going to do with my life? I hadn't figured it out yet. And so, long story short, I worked as a personal trainer for many years after undergrad, and I still was playing in my band and writing music and writing poetry and things like that. And I loved working with people. And the more I did it, the more I realized I actually think I liked teaching. That was the part of the training I liked. And so I decided to start looking into MFA programs at that time because I loved poetry so much. And so I did that, and I continued being a trainer and really got most of my teaching from that. And then from the MFA, went right into a PhD program and studied composition and rhetoric. But again, it was a very organic thing that happened. And there I was, all finished, and then, teaching in a classroom. But it was a long journey for me. And I think that I'm glad it happened the way it did, because I gained so many valuable skills from different things. And as a first generation college student, teaching in a community college, I really identify with a lot of my students. And I wouldn't have that sensitivity had I not gone through what I did. So that's really what got me into academia. But it was not by accident, but it was just by surprise. I was surprised that it happened.
Right. Well, how did you come up with the idea? We can see how you had interest in music, and then you eventually found your way into English. How did you come up with the idea to integrate music into teaching?
That was another thing that just gradually happened. So, gosh, I've been teaching 17 years now, which is hard to imagine. And I was thinking about just some of the things surrounding this book and what inspired it. And really, I remember it was my second semester teaching when I was in graduate school. And I was teaching a developmental writing course at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And when we're working on one unit that was focusing on some short stories, and I had to teach them The Lottery, the Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, and which I love that short story, and they enjoyed it too. It just so happened right at the same time there's a band out of Pennsylvania. They're called Breaking Benjamin, and they had a song that was really popular at that time called So Cold. And after I did a little digging, the video for that song is it's like an adaptation of The Lottery, but it's done differently. And so it gave me the idea. I'm like, I think I can use that in my class to teach my students about, symbolism and foreshadowing and all of those things in addition to the book. And I did that, and they really enjoyed it. And so from there, it just kind of took off. I started looking for more and more ways to do that in research writing and intro comp and literature courses. And so it gradually kind of worked its way into my coursework until now mostly all of my coursework is based on that. And the other thing that really pulled me or wanted me to pull in music into my class was that I spent so much time prior to going into my PhD work in a coffee shop working on my MFA, and I loved it. It was such a comfortable space to write. And I started asking, why do so many people come in here and hang out and write and do work? And I'm like, there's always music playing in the background. And the lighting is very thoughtful, and it's not fluorescent lighting. It's real moody. And so I started thinking, how could I replicate that in my writing classroom so that I could help students feel more comfortable? And so that's when I started making playlists for each of my classes. And so music plays from my first class till my class now. Music always plays in the background during class. And so that was something that was just inspired by my own experience at a coffee shop. So so many ways music found its purpose in my class.
Yeah. So what is something that you feel like a music can accomplish more than traditional methods?
I think the biggest roadblock that I've experienced from the first day I've started teaching until today, it's that beginning of the semester, having students come in not feeling confident about themselves as writers, or even confident about their own experiences, and it really makes them feel uncomfortable at a community college, especially because we have students with ranging proficiency levels. We have traditional students, non-traditional, dual enrolled, so it's all over the place. And I really find music to be something that creates a really warm, inviting atmosphere, especially if on the first day you're asked by your professor, hey, give me a list of some of your favorite bands and artists. I'm going to create a playlist. And as the semester goes on, I want you to keep adding stuff to it. And I think it's great to be in a class and working on something and hearing one of your favorite songs being played. I think that helps students develop that comfort level. And then once they're there, you can really help them with the confidence. And so I think before anything else, in terms of how music can teach, essay writing and, story, the importance of a good story and things like that, it creates a very comfortable environment. And I think that is really necessary for students to feel like they belong and that they can become better at the craft of writing. So, yeah.
So what are some improvements that you've noticed now that you've started using this approach to composition?
Students are able to craft introductions a lot with not only with ease, but they're able to understand why they're set up the way they are and how they fit with the conclusion. So one of the first assignments we do in my intro comp course is a narrative. And students have the option to write about a favorite song that transports them to a time or a person or a place, or they can write original lyrics or a poem about that person, place, or time. And we have a great opportunity at that point to start talking about introductions and the importance of a good hook, and how you should try to connect that to your conclusion, but you don't want to repeat what you said exactly in your introduction and conclusion. So I show them a lot of songs that do that. And one in particular that they love is The Black Parade by My Chemical Romance. And it's a great example of how you can link an intro and a conclusion, but do it in a very thoughtful and original way. So the beginning of the song starts off with some single keys, and the singer comes in and starts singing, and then there's this really cool syncopated marching beat, and then it just layers and layers until they get into the song. And then the outro is very similar, but there's some nuances to it that make it unique. And I always use those as an example to teach them how to craft a really strong intro and conclusion and to do it creatively. And that analogy seems to make sense for them. So that's one thing. Transitions, I think, are always difficult to teach, but musically, they're so, once you use that as your model, it's so easy to explain to them, why does this verse transition so nicely into the chorus? Well, this is why, right? And we can talk about that, and then we start looking at their own writing, and they're able to view it in those terms, and it just seems to click. So those are just a couple examples. The other thing is word choice and economy of words. So, one of the big advantages, I think, of using songwriters in a class to model academic writing is that they're detailed, they're concise, and they're telling a very clear story for the most part. And so I think one of the things students struggle with is doing that, being detailed, being concise, and getting the message across. And so I've noticed a huge difference with that in terms, this semester with my my research writing class, it's definitely helped. So those are a couple, but there's so many ways that it helps improve my students' writing.
How do you go about choosing like really good songs to depict all of this?
Yeah, so for each individual class, I build that playlist. So I create a Spotify playlist, and then after the first day, they all have access to it and they can just keep adding to it. And the idea is that I can look at that list and pull some songs from it throughout the semester for all my in-class activities, my free writing sessions, journal entries, all of those things. So even though I have stuff in the book, because I needed to have something in there where if somebody's never done this before, at least there's a place to start. But for me, I really base a lot of it off of my students' musical taste. And so it really makes it particular to those groups. So it's always changing, which is fun for me too, because I'll get, a slew of new music that I've never heard before. And it's challenging to try to incorporate it into the fabric of the lesson plan. But I think that's what makes teaching fun, that you're constantly changing things. So yeah, I use a lot of what my students provide, and it's really helpful.
If you were to build a playlist for yourself, for your own writing purposes, what are some tracks or artists who would be on it?
Number one would be Slide by the Goo Goo Dolls. It's
Okay.
probably,
Okay.
if anybody asks what's your favorite song, that I can say that with ease. That is my favorite song. It has been for decades. I love that song. It's a song that I remember coming out when I was in college, and at that time I really struggled through college. It was not the experience I had when I was in grad school. It was really a difficult time for me. And so I remember hearing that song, and I remember like looking at the lyrics, listening to the song over and over, and it clicked. Like I was looking at those lyrics and I could unpack that story. And it's one of the first songs I remember as an adult feeling like I was able to interpret. And so I love that song for that reason. It really gave me some confidence because I was taking a lot of literature courses at that time, a lot of literary analysis, and I would go to these classes and I would have all these ideas and, raise my hand and throw something out, and the professor would be like, nope, that's not it, and move on. And it was really discouraging for me as a student. So that was the moment where I felt like, actually, I am pretty good at this. Like I can, look into this writing and unpack it and find the metaphor or the symbolism and understand it. So Slide's one of them that would be on there. Any 90s alt rock you could throw on my playlist. Soundgarden, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam. I mean, any grunge band I love. That was definitely my favorite time for music. But then I love Led Zeppelin. I love David Bowie. Definitely Pink Floyd. I love jazz. I love classical music. I think my playlist would be very eclectic, because depending on what kind of mood I'm in or what task I'm doing really makes the choice of what I'm listening to in that space. So if I'm writing, I always put on classical music because there aren't any words that I'm going to hear that are going to interrupt my train of thought. But if I'm doing like a lesson plan, that type of writing, or I'll throw on something, some more energetic music, maybe I'll throw on some Pearl Jam or some rock or something like that. So it would be an eclectic blend of music, I think, for me.
It is so fun to get to share that with students, though, too. Maybe who didn't grow up with Pearl Jam or Alice in Chains.
Yeah, there's so many different choices out there. And how do you work with students that, well, I like this song, but I like that song, and, the relatability, how do you bridge those gaps?
I think so. The stuff that I model in class is just an example, but for their own individual writing, any assignment, they have full autonomy to choose any music they want. And so I think at least it gives them a baseline, and then they can choose any songs they want. So for instance, I have one assignment that's a comparative analysis. So students get to choose 2 songs to compare and contrast, and they choose any songs they want, so that freedom allows them to pull in stuff that they like. And I always tell my students, like, if there's a song you want me to talk about in class or use as an example, like, tell me. I may not know the song, so I may need a little background, but tell me why you think it's an important one for this particular unit we're working on, and then I'll pull it in. And a great example of that is from years ago. Admittedly, I was not a country fan at the time, and I was teaching at a rural college, and lots of country fans in my class. So I didn't use a lot of it at that time. And I had one student, I'll never forget him. He came up to me after class and he's like, there's a band, they're a little new, they're kind of new right now. He's like, but I think you would love this song. He's like, just based on the stuff you've played in class, he's like, I want you to listen to this song, and I think you'll really like it. And I'm like, all right on. So I went home, listened to the song, and I just had it on repeat. I loved it. It was not what I expected, and I fell in love with the song. The song was Colder Weather by Zac Brown Band. And that song, wasn't 17 years ago, but like maybe 14 years later, I still use that song every semester. So I think it's such a beautiful thing to be open to music and how it can really impact not only us as individuals, but how we do things. I mean, that song, it's such a great illustration for one of the lessons that I do, that I still use it. So
Hearing about this student impact is really interesting. Do you remember any particular aha moment you saw a student have when they were maybe in class writing and you could see the connections being made?
yeah, I think definitely with I'll use a recent project. So last semester we rescored the movie Dead Poets Society. And so students were put into groups and they were each responsible for a specific scene, and they had to find a song. It could be contemporary or a classic song, it didn't matter, to fit that scene. And I was really teaching them about mood and tone, atmosphere, the dynamics between the characters, all of that context, all that good stuff. And the beginning of that project, they really found challenging. But as they got into it and they found that song and they started writing about it, there was one particular group that picked a song. I don't know. Have you seen that movie?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
So you know the scene towards the end, the tragic scene. And so that was their scene. That's what they wanted to do. And so they found a song to fit over that. And to hear them talk about how the song was able to capture the mood and what the mood was in that moment, how it was able to also capture the feelings of the mom and dad at the same time, while it's also focused on the main character. That was incredible to see, because those were things we talked about early in the semester that we all kind of struggled through as a group. And then to see them writing about it with such ease and precision and able to have conversations about it and feel so confident about this song, this part of the song really captures what the dad's feeling, because it says this, this lyric really matches, but also the dynamics of the music go up, and like, that was amazing. So I think that was more for me, is to watch that happening, but those things seem to occur all throughout the semester, and I really attribute that to music and how it just really opens up so many doors to those aha moments.
That's incredible. Okay, what was the song?
There were two songs. The one they picked was actually it was a Beethoven song. They went full on classical with it. But then they did another one with Taylor Swift, and why can't I remember the song? It'll come to me. I'll remember it for you, or I'll email it to you. So they had both. They wanted to see how it would pan out, and we ended up going with the Beethoven one for our actual movie premiere. But yeah, it was a Taylor Swift song and Beethoven. I will think of the Taylor Swift song for you. Yeah.
So that's really original, rescoring a movie. What are some other types of activities that you do in class like that?
So we do same class. I wanted them to do a concert review, and so I worked with the music venue that's on our campus. It's the Wilson Center, and we're so lucky to have that resource. So I worked with them over the summer, because I knew the bands and the artists that who were coming into town. And I found one particular artist that I thought would be perfect for our class. And so it was Melissa Etheridge. And so I had them reach out to Melissa Etheridge and her team, explained what I was doing in the class, what our assignment was, and that I would love to be able to bring my students not only to the concert to see her perform, but to do an interview with her. And so the assignment, while it was a concert review, we spent 2 weeks prior to her coming to town researching her. So I was teaching my students how to do research, and these are like 16, 17, 18-year-olds. So they, a lot of them didn't know who Melissa Etheridge was until we started looking at her stuff. Their parents did. They were really excited, but the students didn't. So it gave them an opportunity to really research her, get to know her background, analyze her lyrics, and prep for this interview. And so we got to go meet her before the show. We sat in for sound check, and my students interviewed her for an hour on her songwriting process, on some of her lyrics, on her inspirations, all of these wonderful things. And then we watched the show, and then they did the assignment. That's been one of my favorite assignments. My students still talk about that. It was such a thrill for them to be able to meet somebody that's been in the industry for this long and have such an impact on not just the music scene, but she does so much philanthropic work. She's just amazing. So that was one. Another assignment is the soundtrack to your life. They love that one. So they get to create album artwork. So they all get their own blank album sleeve that I had purchased for them, and then they get to decorate it. And then the actual paper itself is, they get to pick a collection of songs that really make up the soundtrack to their life. And it's a way for them to kind of tell their story, but use those songs as an entryway into that memory. That's one. We do the narrative. We do a comparative analysis. And so those are usually my go-to assignments. But then smaller assignments, free writing prompts and journal entries, sky's the limit with music. Today we looked at a Melissa Etheridge song. So we looked at Shadow of a Black Crow, and they took some time to unpack that song and just write about it in a free write. So
Yeah, that's a perfect segue into a question we have, talking about students getting excited and still talking about assignments and experiences down the line. If we were to run into a student 3 to 4 years from now, what would you want them to remember about their experience in your class?
I think first and foremost, I would want them to say that Dr. J cared about me and cared about my experiences enough to encourage me to write about them and to give me the freedom to use my own life and my own background as content for my writing. So I think that would be first and foremost. It's funny, it's such a great question. I had a student from probably 10 years ago send me a message on Facebook, and it was the sweetest message, but she said that, she was thinking about our class and that, you know, how much fun she had in that class, in that writing class, and how much she learned and how music made it so much more enjoyable for her. And that was amazing. Those are the kind of things that, like, to get a comment like that from a student from that long ago. So I really think to hear them say that they enjoyed it, that it gave them confidence, that they realized they had something to say, that would make my heart happy to know that. And certainly I hope they would, be diehard fans of the Goo Goo Dolls at that point.
Right? Naturally.
Naturally, right?
So, might have some potential authors out there or instructors that are listening or watching this, and they think, I want to try this approach. Other than adopting the book, what would you have for advice for them if they wanted to try this method?
I think the best piece of advice would be authentic. And by that I mean, ask yourself, like, what is it about music that inspires you as an individual? And really use that as your entry into using music in your classroom. Because I think that's really important. You don't want to go into this using music that really doesn't speak to you, maybe as a teacher, or there's no connection to it for you. You just think, well, this is a song that my students will like, so I'll use it. My students have really responded to the times when I explain my connection to something, that I share my personal story and then use it in class, because it gives them an opportunity to get to know me and my history and my past. And I think that's important. So I say be authentic, like find the music that inspires you, because if you're inspired as a teacher, then you're going to inspire your students. There's no two ways about it. And start with that, like start small. I didn't, just create a whole class full of music overnight. It was really like a very gradual process where I would just slowly put little activities into my courses or assignments, and then it just kind of continued to build up. So I would say start small. Like if you're using this book, which would be great because there's so many resources in there for you, don't feel like you have to do the whole thing. Maybe you're pulling from different tracks and starting with that, and just take your time with it, but be authentic. Like, stay true to yourself and pull your enthusiasm and interest into the fabric of it.
Speaking of the book, I don't think we even got into what made you decide to create a digital textbook.
Oh, I had been wanting to do it for a long time, years. Ever since I taught an honors class for the Cook's Honors College at Indiana University of Pennsylvania one summer. It was for junior and senior high school students. And it was like an immersive experience for them to see what college is like. And so I taught that. And it was really the first class where I built it all around music. And I called it Memories and Melodies, oddly enough. And there was something about that class that always stuck with me. At the end of the semester, we did a full performance. I brought my drums into the classroom, and we did songs together that they wrote. And it was really my dream. It was like, this is what I want all my classes to be like. And so after that happened, I thought I'd really like to organize this somehow. But I don't know the first thing about writing a textbook or creating it. So that was the thought. And then years later, I had the opportunity to connect with you all, and it was the perfect timing because I had spent all that time mapping out in my mind what I wanted to do. And so once I had the green light, the book practically wrote itself because all the ideas were already there. And so, yeah, but I've been wanting to do it for a long time, long time.
Glad we caught you at the right time.
Definitely did. You definitely did.
Are there any other skills that you're hoping that students are going to develop while engaging with music as you're teaching composition?
Critical analysis and critical thinking.
Okay.
And I hear so many people talk about how their students need to be able to think critically and all, and I think students do think critically. I think we need to position them within activities and assignments that allow them to pull from things that they're comfortable with or they're knowledgeable of to do that. And so analyzing music is really helpful. So, critical analysis, like when we do the compare contrast, that comparative analysis assignment, because they're using two songs that they like, they're not going to pick songs they don't like. It allows me to teach them things about analysis it just makes it easier because they're enjoying both of the actual subjects. And so to ask them to do a deep dive into those lyrics and look at the music itself, and then maybe do a little research on the artist and the band and all, it just makes the task so much more enjoyable for them. And it really pushes them to be more thoughtful and critically minded. Another thing that I think using music and just, having that as the motif in the classes, note-taking strategies. I've really been able to teach students better ways to read sources and to respond to them and to really think critically through those as well. So one of the note-taking strategies that I love is the double entry journal. And it's nothing new. It's something I learned in graduate school. And basically, you take a piece of paper, draw a line down the center, and the left column, those are any quotes you're pulling out of the article or the video, anything you're noting that you think is significant to the meaning of it, words or phrases, things like that. And then in the right-hand column, the corresponding column, you're writing your thoughts. So it could be something like, maybe a response to a quote from the book or the video, or it could be, I have no idea what this means. It seems significant, but I'm not sure yet. So it creates a nice conversation with whatever you're analyzing. And I think it's really helpful for students because it's forcing them to think critically and to pull in their own thoughts and perspectives in the process. And interestingly enough, that approach was actually used by Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters to write an entire album. So they wrote Sonic Highways. I think that was in 2015. And the premise was they were going to travel to a different city, immerse themselves in that city for a week, write one song, write it there, record it there, do all of it, and then move on to the next place. And Dave Grohl talked about how he would do all these interviews with local artists and musicians, and they would be recorded, and he would take the transcriptions at the end of the week and do the double entry journal to create his lyrics for the song. And so it's a really great way, again, to encourage students to think critically, but use something that, again, analyzing a song can still be a lot of fun, especially if it's a song you like.
How do you fight with the growing presence of AI, both in writing and in generating music? What do you do to present authenticity in your students when they have this kind of shiny new toy on the side they can use?
Yeah, and it's not going anywhere, right? It's something that we all have to wrap our heads around and figure out the best way to use it and the best way to teach our students how to use it. And so I'm working through all of that stuff. I'll say this, I don't I don't really run into any issues because so much of what students are writing about, it's about themselves. Even though it's attached to maybe a song or a larger assignment, really at the end of the day, I'm asking them to pull in their experience and perspectives to really dive into the subject matter. And the other thing is all the journal entries that I have them do, or all of the cadenzas, which are the free writes that they do, they're all built in a way that they're trying to help them with a larger piece of writing, but they're small and they're low stakes because I'm not looking at grammar or mechanics or any of that stuff. So I feel like it's a sneaky way of getting them to write and not feel like they have to use AI or generative AI to get something together, because they're like, I just need to put my thoughts down. Like, I don't need to make this perfect. And so that encourages that. And then the assignments, I try to make them as personal as possible. I always have, but right now it's really beneficial. So, but I do think there are ways to thread AI throughout the course and use it really in a way that's going to help them with the writing process. So I'm still trying to figure that out.
Well, that is a tactic that I don't think we've heard people talk about, the personalization. So, I mean, that's something we could probably put on and share with other authors that we have too, who ask us, what do we do? What do we do? Because like you said, it's not going away, but it definitely can become a tool for good.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And it's funny. I remember early in my career, and even up till maybe a few years ago, I would always have to defend the way I taught my writing courses, whether it was an intro comp, research writing, because so many people were traditionalists. And if you were teaching, analysis, you need to use a text. Why are you using a video? And I could argue that it's visual rhetoric and it's still right. It didn't land for a lot of people. And they would, be very critical of my assignments. They're too personal. They're too focused on the student's experience and not focused enough on the text. And now it's interesting that we're in this moment now, and the answer, in my opinion, to all of it is that you make it more personal for your students. So I think it's interesting that I think a lot of the critics that I had years ago are probably going to have to start coming around to this side. That's my guess. My drive for like making it as personal as I could for students was really just based on my own experience as a student. Being in college and feeling like really my experiences or my writing didn't really matter. I needed to be focused on something outside of my own experience. And if I wasn't able to talk about that thoughtfully, then that meant I wasn't a good writer. And so that was what I dealt with. And then I went to graduate school and went into an MFA program and started writing poetry. And I was able to write about, dealing with depression and anxiety and just issues that I was really struggling with. And it was helping. And so when I finally got into the classroom, those were kind of the things I thought most about. Like, that really had a dramatic effect on me. So if I could do that for my students and do it early on, what would that do for them? And so really that was why.
You've mentioned a couple times you were a first generation student, and I was as well. If there's student listening, what advice would you give them just in general as a first generation?
That you absolutely belong, that there is a place for you in higher education, that do not be put off by those thoughts in the back of your head that this is too hard, or this work is too much for me, or I can't handle it. You can. There's definitely a place for you, and to just give yourself some grace. There's moments where you may stumble, but that doesn't encompass your whole career in academia. Like, you're allowed to stumble and learn from your mistakes and move on and grow. But yeah, develop that confidence and just know that you belong in that space. I think that's the biggest thing.
Are there any other kind of creative intersections that you're interested in exploring?
Oh man, performance is a big one, and I've started incorporating more of a performative piece in all of my classes. So the classes that I teach at this, so I'm the director of the honors program here. So each semester I teach an honors section of English 111, which is the intro class, and then an honors section of research writing. And so I've really started to integrate more performance into those. And so my English 111, they're actually not only writing lyrics, but we're performing them at the end of the semester. So this past semester, we did an open mic. And so I brought my drums in, and my students played piano, guitar, and we performed for the college. And so I think performance is something that I like to thread in there and help students to get comfortable being in front of an audience, and not only being in front of an audience, but delivering like original material. And so for the research writing class, that class is centered on the haunted history of Wilmington, North Carolina. So it's an immersive research class where we go around downtown Wilmington and we investigate these different places that are allegedly haunted. And the creative element of it is that there's a group of my students will write original songs about those places, and then we'll perform them at the end of the semester. So yeah, performance, I think, is playing a big role. And it's funny, that was a big piece of my dissertation work, because I was looking at how do you create nurturing, equitable teacher-student relationships in a writing classroom. And I did a lot of research on performance theory and performance and all that stuff. And it's cool to see how it's kind of finding its way into my class now. And I never imagined that I would be performing songs with my students at the end of the semester that they wrote in the class. Like, it's wild. So, yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. And it's really cool to bring in like the history of the community you're in as well.
Yeah, especially for my students, they've lived here most of their lives, and to go somewhere that they've passed, 1,000 times but didn't know anything about, and come out of there like, wow, that was really cool. It's fun to see that.
So what about the students that were listening to this and think, I'd really like to take this course, but I can't sing or play an instrument to save my life?
Right. And most of my students are in that category. It's, there's always going to be a couple that are already musicians, but primarily most of my students are not. And I think the way I start the course off, especially with that narrative assignment and the lyric writing portion of it, if they want to do it, it's a very low stakes, easy way to learn how to do some songwriting without having to be a songwriter. And one of the techniques that I use, it's an old technique, and it was used by David Bowie. It was used by Kurt Cobain, Bob Dylan, and it's the cut up technique. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but David Bowie was big on this. And it's the idea, maybe you have a journal that you write down some random thoughts or, whatever it may be throughout the week. Maybe you take one of those pages and you cut all of those words up or cut them up by line or whatever, and then you sit down and you reconstruct it. So it's essentially deconstruction, and then you're reconstructing it into something original. So for my students that have no music background, they don't play any instruments, they haven't done poetry, I use that with them. And so I'll tell them to pick 3 songs that are about a topic or a theme that they're interested in exploring for that assignment. And then I'll have them print out those lyrics, we cut them up, and then they do the cut up technique. And I give them a general scaffolding for the verse and the chorus section and all that stuff. And I end up having students that they're enthusiastic about trying it, and they do it and they love it. They walk away and they're like, I don't have a musical bone in my body, but I really like the lyrics I came up with. So there's definitely room for those students. I think all you would need to be a student in my class is just an open mind and an appreciation for music. That's it. Everybody would do well.
Sign me up.
I was thinking the same.
I'm like, I want to go back.
You were always welcome in my class.
Well, we do have a couple of our last questions are more of the fun questions. Just the like, for example, if you could have dinner or a conversation with any writer or poet or lyricist, past or present, who would it be?
That is the easiest question I've heard all day. John Resnick from the Goo Goo Dolls.
I knew it.
I love that man. I do. And I did get to meet him once, and it was incredible. But his writing style and just his songwriting technique, it's really, I don't know. It's really, it inspired me in an odd way. It inspired me to want to teach writing. Yeah, because people often ask me like, well, who or what really inspired you to want to do this? And I'm always like, John Resnick from the Goo Goo Dolls. And they're like, what are you talking about? He doesn't teach. But it was the fact that he's very authentic. And he's good with, he knows who he is. He really is thoughtful about his lyrics. He uses his experiences to really connect with, his audience and other people. And I admire that. And he still does that with his music. And so I would love to sit down with him and talk more about his songwriting techniques. And it's funny, long time ago, I was a member of the Goo Goo Dolls fan club. And so part of that fan club was you could enter these contests. And so, I'd ended up winning one of the contests to go meet him before a show, and it was great and everything. But even better than that was you could also just email these people, like anybody in the band, and email them a question, and then they would, respond to it. And so I asked my class at the time, because we were looking at a lot of Goo Goo Dolls music, and I said, let's come up with a question for John Resnick, and send it to him. And they're like, okay, whatever, he's never going to see it. The question was, how do you deal with writer's block? And, so we sent it off to him, and he responded with a video. And it was one of the coolest things for my students to see. And his advice was great. It was really, he's very down to earth. And the idea of you write and write and write, and you produce probably things that you think is garbage, but you keep going and you don't ever discard that, because at some point it's that thought's going to come through and something's going to happen. But I'd really just love him. So yeah.
The last question that we've asked everyone that's on the podcast is a section called "You're Wrong." What is a myth or maybe a pet peeve of yours when it comes to composition that everybody has, that you're like, no, you're wrong?
Oh, wow. Oh man, there's so many. And it's not from students. It's from other professors that teach writing. I think placing so much emphasis on MLA, APA, and the technical aspects of writing, feeling like if his or her student is not able to create a solid thesis, that means that student can't move on to do the rest of the essay or the piece of writing, or getting hung up on the technical aspects. I think that's a huge mistake, because you can't. These semesters are so short. Ours are 16, sometimes they're 8, depending if it's a mini-mester. Summer courses are 10. That's a short amount of time to cover a lot of ground. So I don't think that, hyper-fixating on grammar, mechanics, and the technical aspects of writing it's not going to inspire or encourage a student to want to become a better writer. So I think that's one. And I think, and I touched upon this earlier, I think really thinking that music, it's fun and it's a novel idea, but it doesn't really teach academic writing, I think is is completely off base too. And, that's something that I've defended for years. I think that all of the good things that we want our students to do in an academic essay, songwriters are a great model for it. And they're a lot more familiar to students than perhaps a lit crit essay or something like that they're struggling their way through. So I think that there are a lot of creative things that we can do in our classrooms that go deeper than the surface enjoyment that people see. There's a real foundation there, and a thoughtful foundation. Theory and pedagogy go into all of that. And so I think that's a big one too.
That resonates with GRL and our values. We're all about meeting students where they are. And that does it. We want to make sure there's not anything that you really wanted to share that we haven't asked you about.
I think those professors out there that not that I don't want to say skeptical of this approach, but maybe interested in what's behind the approach. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to kind of lay that out. So, what is the theory and the pedagogy that creates the foundation for doing something like this? It is really sound in terms of, expressivism, which is something that in the field of composition studies, we talk so much about, but the idea of really encouraging students to express something, and within that expression and having them write about things they care about and have experienced, that naturally they will start to become more and more proficient as writers. And so that's one thing that's really embedded in what I do. And then the other one is critical pedagogy. And because that is all about creating equity and really creating more of a transactional relationship between the teacher and the student. And so that's why I give my students so much freedom and say so in not only like the assignments they're doing, but also the evaluation. So oftentimes, if there's an assignment and they just turned in their annotated bibliographies for my research class, but we'll build the rubric together in class. And so they will decide what's important in each category and how many points it should be. And it's a great exercise because it allows them to be part of that. So that all comes from critical pedagogy and just wanting students to be part of that learning process and also be subject knowers. So a big term in critical pedagogy is like subject versus subject knower. And a subject is like, the easiest way I can describe it is the banking concept of education, where your students are looked as they're like receptacles, and you are going to just throw some knowledge at them and they will digest that. And then, for lack of a better phrase, spit it back on a test or an essay. And it's not really learning. So this using music and helping them pull in their experiences and doing it in a way that's familiar to them allows them to become subject knowers. And so I think those two things are really important to consider. And then the last thing I'll say is that this approach is rooted in classical education. It's got classical education written all over it. So this kind of stuff has been used since 95 AD. I mean, there was a writing instructor named Quintilian that used creative writing exercises to teach students and future citizen orators, and it's all this stuff. Like it's nothing new. So there is a very, very robust practicality behind all this, but there's also a nice foundation in theory and pedagogy too.
Thanks for tuning in to Can I Get a Retake, a podcast by Great River Learning. If you liked the episode, show your support by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. For detailed show notes and transcripts, visit greatriverlearning.com. Can I Get a Retake is brought to you by hosts Michelle Manaman and Deanna Plussel. Our show is produced and edited by Michaela Albee and Maggie Christensen. Artwork for the podcast is crafted by Michelle Manaman. Our intro music is courtesy of Comma Media. We'll be back soon with another captivating chat with a top GRL educator.